I've prepared a Figma file that we are going to use as reference. I will post the link to the Figma file in the video description below. If you are following along, head over to the Figma website now and sign up for a free account. You can then import the file that I have prepared. Let's start with the main navigation. Open the project that we've set up in the previous video. Open the styles folder and add a new file called _main-navigation.scss. This will be our main class for the top navigation. You can get the color code from Figma by clicking on the Edit Style button. Copy the code and set it as the background color. The height is 56 pixels. Let's update the HTML template to render the main navigation CSS class that we just created. Don't forget to set the width to 100%. We now need to import this new main navigation file that we just created. Let's also update the background color of the body tag to match the Figma mock. We can now run the yarn dev command to verify that our main navigation is rendering as expected. Nice! The navigation is loading. The menu icon is spaced 16 pixels from the left. We can add 16 pixels padding to the main navigation class. Let's download the menu icon. We can download the menu icon by clicking on the menu icon until the burger menu is selected in the side navigation. After selecting the burger menu icon, click on the export button. Make sure to select SVG as the file format. Download the icon and move it to an images folder inside the project directory. Let's create a class for our navigation button. We will set the background to the image we just downloaded from the Figma template. The width and height can be copied from the Figma file. Let's add the navigation toggle class we just created to our HTML file. We also need to set the border of the button to none. Otherwise the icon will still have the default button border that browsers apply by default. If your project is not running, run it by executing the yarn init command. You should see a similar error as we have not yet set up a Webpack file loader capable of loading our SVG file. As you can see, our SVG file is not being loaded. If your project is running, stop it and add a new dev dependency called file loader. Let's add the necessary configuration to our webpack.config file. These couple of lines tell Webpack to use the file loader when it encounters any file with the extensions listed on line 29. Our project should now be able to load our SVG file without any errors. Let's run the yarn dev command again. As you can see, our menu icon is not vertically aligned. We can align the icon by using Flexbox as the layout and set the align item CSS rule to center. Let's update the padding and margin of the menu icon to be according to the Figma mock. Let's move on to the YouTube icon. Follow the same steps as before to download the image as an SVG. Let's create a CSS class for the logo. This class will only specify the height. Let's add an image tag to render the logo. I've decided to use an image tag for the logo so you could set the alt text for in case the logo can't be loaded. Our image does not seem to be loading correctly. This is due to us relying on Webpack to bundle all our website's assets. This includes images. You might wonder why our menu icon loads, but not our logo. The reason is our HTML is not processed the same as our CSS or JavaScript files. When Webpack encounters resource imports in our CSS or JavaScript files, it knows it needs to bundle the reference resource. We can help Webpack here by using some special syntax and import the image as a resource. This will force Webpack to bundle the image as a resource. We now get a new error. We need to specify a public path in our webpack.config file. We need to stop our project and restart it by running the yarn dev command. The menu icon seems to be repeating. Let's fix this by adding no repeat to our background CSS property. Let's compare our layout. I think this is close enough for now. Let's start the site navigation by creating a new SCSS file. You can name it anything. I'm going to name it site navigation.scss. We can start by creating a class named site navigation. If you are unsure of any measurement, please reference the Figma file. The site navigation's width is 240 pixels. Let's add the background color as well. The menu items are spaced 12 pixels from each group's top and bottom border. Let's create a class for the individual menu items. Each menu item is 40 pixels in height. And each icon is spaced 24 pixels from the left border. We can keep the spacing consistent for left and right. Let's add a class for the menu item icon. The menu item icon dimensions are 24 pixels by 24 pixels. The space between the menu item text and icon is 24 pixels. Let's add a margin right of 24 pixels to the menu icon. This will keep the text always 24 pixels away. Let's create a class for the menu item text. We need to get some information regarding the font family and the font size and line height. The Figma mock is using Google's Roboto font. You can get the code from Google's font website. Let's open the Google font website now. We only need the 400 weight font for now. Copy the code needed to import the font. We need to add this line of code to our HTML file. Instead of setting only the menu item text class to use this font, we can update our body tag to use this font. This way, any element we add will use the Roboto font by default. For the menu item text, we need to set the font size to 14 pixels and line height to 21 pixels. We also need to set the color. I believe the color used in the Figma mock is white. We can refactor our CSS rules to take some advantage of SASS. We are following a consistent naming convention, so we can nest our class names and SASS will generate the correct CSS class names for us. If you want to know the full name of your nested class, hover on the class name and VSCode will show the full class name in a tooltip. Let's create a variation for our icon class. We need to be able to render multiple types of icons. Download the home icon from the Figma file. Remember to select SVG as the file type. To keep our project organized, I will create a side navigation icons folder. Let's set the background to the home icon we just downloaded. We need to set the background size and the background position for the icons to correctly size. Let's create the markup in our HTML file. We need to copy the class names we created and apply them to the individual elements. We can now start our project by running the yarn dev command. I forgot to update my app.SCSS file to reference our new site navigation file. Such a noob mistake. Let's update the app.SCSS file to import the new file. Our site navigation is rendering, but it's not rendering as expected. This is due to the div's default block layout. Let's update the site navigation to use Flexbox. I'm not sure if you can see, but our icon and text is not vertically centered or aligned. We can use align item center as before. Let's move on to the next item. We can download all the icons at once. Select all the icons and click the export button. Remember to select SVG as the file type. This should export a single file. If you unzip or extract the file, you should see all the icons. Our home icon is now rendering as black instead of the gray color. This is due to the fill property being set on the exported SVG. We can control the fill color from CSS by setting the fill CSS property. Let's grab the color from the Figma file and let's add it to our icon class. Even though we've set the fill color, our fill color is being ignored as our SVG is referenced as a resource and is not embedded in our HTML file. If we want to be able to override the fill color of the SVG images via CSS, we need to embed our SVG images in the HTML template. Let's reuse the syntax we used on the logo image to embed our SVG files. We can also remove the home variation icon CSS class. It seems that the path of our SVG image is being embedded instead of the actual content of the SVG file. We need to add another Webpack file loader to help us embed the content of the SVG file. The package name is raw loader. Let's add it. We could add a config section to our webpack.config file to use the raw loader. If we do this, we will have multiple file loaders trying to load the same file extension. Instead, we can selectively use the raw loader as we need it. We can update our special syntax to use the following convention. This convention tells Webpack what file loader we want to use. Let's start the project again by running the yarn dev command. Our icon is loading again. That's a good sign. But it seems that our fill color is still not working. If you look at the SVG markup, you will see that the fill property is specified on the path element. We can update our CSS to target the path element. I'm creating a CSS rule that is more specific than the fill attribute that is specified inside the SVG file. Let's have a look at the applied CSS rule in the DevTools. As you can see, our CSS rule is now more specific than the SVG's rule, and our fill color is applied. Let's create the other two items in this group. I forgot to add the spacing between each menu item. We can add a margin bottom CSS rule to each menu item. Let's move on to the border that is used to separate each group of menu items. Let's grab the color from the Figma file. I'm going to be using the native HR element. Let's create a new CSS class. We will also need to set the margin to 0 and the width to 100%. Remember to add it to the HTML template. Let's create the following section of menu items. The next menu section contains a header. Let's create a CSS class for this header. The font size is 14 pixels and the line height is 21 pixels. The font weight is 500. We also need to set the text color to white and the text decoration to uppercase. This will help ensure that we can type the header in normal case in the HTML template. We also need to set the padding on the header. I think this padding is the same as we used on the icons. We also want the header to be 8 pixels from the top section of the menu group and any item below it. When we initially added the Roboto font to the HTML template, we only imported the default 400 variation. We now also need to import the 500 variation, also known as bold. Let's head back to the Google Font website and add the medium variation. Our header is now rendering as expected. Let's add the rest of the menu items now. Before we move on, I'm going to do some more refactoring. This will remove some code duplication. Let's move on to the URLs at the bottom of the site navigation. I'm going to name the CSS class links. Feel free to choose a different name if you want. The font size is 13 pixels and the line height is 18 pixels. The color is white. Each link has an 8 pixel spacing between one another. Let's add a margin right CSS rule. The link seems to render correctly. Let's add the rest. Our links are not wrapping, and as a result it is overflowing. We need to set the flex wrap property. Okay, wait. Let's not set the flex wrap. We can instead create a wrapper class for our links that is not using flexbox, and that specifies the spacing between each group or links. Let's move on to the copyright icon. Our last element seems to be rendering correctly. One difference between our implementation and that of the YouTube website is that our side nav is not fixed. This means when you scroll to the page, the side nav also scrolls. We can update this by adding position fixed on the main side navigation class. As you can see, now we don't get the main scroll bar. But this also means we can't scroll our entire site navigation. Let's update the class to include overflow Y auto. We always only want to scroll on the Y axis. This is great. We can scroll the side nav now, but we can't scroll all the way to the bottom. This is due to the main navigation taking up 56 pixels of the viewport height. We can counter this by adding the same amount in padding into the bottom of the side navigation that what the main navigation is using in height. One last thing we can do is add a hover effect on each side nav menu item.